Guys, it's wonderful to be able to welcome you today to our worship service. Now, look, folks, I'd especially like to welcome those of you who have come from Faith FM. I know that there are one or two here that have certainly come today as a result of our invitation on Faith FM. It is wonderful to have you come and join with us. I'm Pastor Gary. I'd love to meet you afterwards. So please, if you are here and you haven't introduced yourself to me, please introduce yourself to me afterwards. Now, look, folks, just a couple of announcements. Now, look, we do want to say a big thank you. Thank you and farewell also to Peter and Estelle. Now, where's Peter and Estelle? Lynn's mum and dad. They're going home, I believe, tomorrow. Been with us for 3 whole months. I tell you what, leaving the grandkids behind after 3 months, what a terrible thing. You know, it's one thing to leave your children behind, but to leave the grandkids behind, that's something totally different. We're going to miss you. All right, just a couple of other items. We've also got today a lunch. Now, immediately after our worship service, we do have a basket lunch together. Please come and join us in the hall, and then back here this afternoon at 2 p.m. We'd love to be able to see you. That will include, I believe, some questions and answers from our good Dr. Ron, and I believe you're going to greatly appreciate what is being shared both this morning and also this afternoon. Now, right now, I'd just like to invite Dr. Ron Niller. Ron, would you like to just come up and join me? It's a very real privilege for me to be able to welcome Dr. Ron Niller into our church today. You know, some time ago, I had the very real privilege of going across to the Creation Ministries camp. Well, I was going to call it a camp meeting because that's how I regarded it, actually. It was on the Sunshine Coast, 5 days of training. I found it some of the most powerful presentations I've heard anywhere. People at PhD level who were sharing the evidence for a creation worldview. And I know at that conference, I think, Ron, you actually shared at that particular conference. And I know I appreciated certainly what you shared and certainly what the other presenters shared as well. Ron is a geomorphologist. Now, I've actually been standing under the shower learning how to say that. Okay, geomorphologist. Ron, tell me something. What is a geomorphologist?
A geomorphologist, you break down the words geomorphologist. Now, ologist is essentially study, geo is earth, and morph is morphology. So I look at the morphology of the earth. I study the morphology of the earth. I ask questions like, why is that valley there, that mountain there? How was it created? That is geomorphology.
Tell me something. What was it? And look, I know you're going to be sharing a lot of your testimony. So if I ask any question you're going to cover, please feel free to say, hey, sit down, I'm going to cover that. But what was it that got you to want to actually study in geomorphology?
I wish to be alone, actually. And that will come out. As in not telling you to leave me alone, I wished to be alone.
Okay. And
in my growing up period in university and PhD.
Wow.
So I sought a study area that took me into wild places, unusual places, just to get away from everybody else in those days. Okay. It's not like that now, Pastor Gary, please understand.
You come to all of these people and yeah. No, it really is wonderful to have you here with us today. Folks, I'm just wondering, would you just like to bow your heads? Because I'd just like to ask the Lord's blessing on Ron before he begins. Father in heaven, we come to you right now. I want to say thank you for being the Creator God. Lord, thank you for being the all-powerful God. Lord, thank you for being the God who has redeemed us. Lord, thank you for being the God who has given us your word, giving us the scriptures. Lord, thank you for giving us the gift of the Holy Spirit. You have given us so much. Lord, we thank you. Thank you for giving us exceedingly great and precious promises. Lord, I just pray that you'd be with us today as we dig into this subject, as Ron shares his testimony of how he moved from being an evolutionist across to being a creationist. Lord, I pray that your blessing might rest on him and on the ministry he represents. We ask and we pray in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Pastor Gary. Thank you very much for the welcome, the wonderful warm welcome earlier, and the prayer then. And thank you to the musicians and the team that played up there. That was wonderful. And I love listening to the science lesson that the children went through as well. I thought that was very good. I thought, we should just leave Leandra up here and I can just sit down and enjoy the morning and pick up some other stuff. So thank you for the invitation to be here. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. And I'm talking twice today, as you heard. Both will have a creation focus to them. The first one is how I became a Christian using science, and how science over the last 50 years has really transformed the relationship between faith and science, the study of science. We see it as a barrier, but it's no longer a barrier. It's in fact an open doorway for scientists to become Christians. And the second talk then is, whilst I share the first time how science can help me become a Christian, in the second talk I'm going to present the other side of the argument, is how science is often used today to actually stop us, to disrupt our relationship with Christ through particularly false teachers. So both of them are creation talks. One is more of a personal nature, I guess, and I hope to come to a couple of pieces of scripture in the end that I'd like you to reflect upon and pray over and study over. But the second talk then is also then a warning of where we are at the moment, what is coming upon our church and what is particularly challenging to us today. So I shall get this all organised. I think I'm ready. Now, I'm probably in the way a little bit of some of you for the slides, so I'll step over here if that's okay. Is that sort of, this is yes, this is no. I come from university background. If I don't get a reaction, I'm going to start walking down those corridors. If you are not looking at me, I'm going to ask you a specific question. I'm a university trained and love it, but I'm glad to be here. So, Evolutionist, Creationist is the talk today. I have a number of qualifications still, surprisingly. Adjunct professor at Turku University in Finland, and I have on site, not often on campus, because I haven't been there for 20 years. But that's okay, I'm still an adjunct professor there in Finland, of all places. So, I'm a scientist by training. That is not a picture of me in the past, that is a picture of me in the future. My hair is already starting to turn grey. But I did not engage in laboratory experimentation. As you heard when Pastor Gary was asking me, I was actually involved in outdoor work, outdoor mapping, sampling, and so on. And to do that, I focused then on areas like landscapes, as I explained, particularly floods. So I became a flood chaser. You see movies about the typhoon chasers. I laugh at those movies. That's not being a real man. A real man chases floods, not typhoons. See, in a typhoon, you can leave some equipment and run away. In a flood, you have to get into it. And that's when I got washed away, knocked unconscious, nearly sent down drains, rescued by SES, all the rest of it. It was a fun life I led in there. Sediments is very much my topic of this morning as well. Sediments is simply a technical word for dirt. The dirt is on the move. Dirt is moving because we have construction, we have erosion, we have all sorts of things, and that's very much attached to the floods as well. But I did a lot of work on fossils as well. I'll just touch on that briefly today as well, because that was part of my journey. Even published papers on microbes. I found that very boring to study microbes. You know, you're looking at little things under a microscope. I just did not find that exciting. I preferred to be out there in the real world. I also roamed the world chasing floods and looking at landscapes. I lived for 10 years in China, particularly the southern end, trying to learn Cantonese, which was interesting. I lived in Finland for a couple of years learning Finnish, and that was great. I worked in Libya. Surprisingly, I worked for the Gaddafi government. You're going to go, ooh, I can see, look at some of your faces now. What were you doing, Ron? I was not doing that sort of thing. I was actually there helping government ministers with sustainability, water supply, and so on, and landscape understandings. I was in Peru, loved being in Peru, and working on the Amazon River, looking at floods and landscapes and so on there. That was exciting as well. In the Peru, you don't worry about them big things that you see on television. It's the little things you worry about when you're on the Amazon. The things that can penetrate any part of your body that you don't want them to penetrate. And they will bring you sicknesses and illnesses that you will be for 6 months in tropical research hospitals in Amsterdam and places like that. So great to be there in Peru. Lovely place, but very challenging. Pacific Islands, Cook Islands, South Africa, worked there as well. And, of course, throughout Australia. Why did I go down that journey? I said I wanted to be alone. Why did I wish to be alone? Simple reasoning, a little bit of background here as to why I was not a Christian. I was not raised in a Christian family. In fact, it was a family of violence. It was a family of alcoholism. And so I still carry the scars on my body. And, of course, I was raised as a dysfunctional young child. I did not know how to communicate. I did not know what a relationship was. And so I sought to be alone. High school proved equally difficult for other reasons that you read about in the media. I became the target in a high school as well. And so I was abused throughout the entire educational process until I was 18. So at 18, I then sought to get an education. Why? I wanted to get away from the life I lived. I wanted to define myself. That's why I took off overseas. Because at that stage, I did not like this particular country because we didn't have the social services or the support systems in those days. And so by the time I was in my early 20s, having done my honours degree, went straight on to do a PhD and so on. And I was still very much a person who was internally dysfunctional. I didn't know how to communicate or how to relate to other people. Now, why did I not accept God? Because I'd heard too many times a male voice saying, I love you, whether it was your father who abused you or whether it was a teacher. And so what happened was, if people spoke to me about a God who loves me, I was not that interested in another male figure saying to me, you're worthy, you're loving, and so on. So I took off around the world. Now, did I attend churches as I went around the world? I actually did, surprisingly. I went to many different churches. Now, that was usually because I was invited. So don't be afraid to invite people to church. I went along, not really wanting to learn much about God, but willing to listen and willing to build a stronger relationship with the person I was working with or travelling with and so on. So I did go to churches around the world. And of course I found it difficult at times because I found them somewhat too friendly at times for me, being a loner, not wanting to communicate. So when I was in the Cook Islands, and I was quite intense about the beautiful singing I heard in the Cook Islands, the magnificent singing. I'm standing there in this church and a huge Cook Islander man behind me reaches out, grabs my shoulders and starts to massage them. And he goes, hey bro, chill bro, hey, just chill bro, hey. And I froze, of course, given my background. But I loved all of those experiences. And people who met me in my travels all around the world constantly prayed for me over 30, 40 years, whatever the period was. And the seed was being planted. So, but nonetheless, during that period of time, I had been taught evolution was the truth. I had been taught, you are not only just taught, it is driven into you in educational systems as it is today. From the very earliest days of you watching a little bit of television as an infant to primary school to universities, it is driven into you as the truth. In fact, in the Queensland government now, they've passed a new law that says even Christian churches must teach that evolution is the absolute truth. But it's not, because it can't be proven to be the truth. But that's what I taught, that sediments, landscapes, fossils, all pointed to an evolutionary argument. Yes, somebody could say, well, maybe it does point a little bit to the Bible, but in fact, it's so weak, I just simply taught evolution. Did I like the evolutionary argument? Not really, to be honest. And the reason that I didn't like it as I grew older and travelled the world was because I came to understand what science is. And this is probably the most important part of the message. What is science? Because we are taught that science is factual. We are taught that science today is the truth. That's what the media presents. Many times that science is the answer. How many times have you heard a radio station or a TV station said, oh, there's been disagreement, but the scientists have said. You hear that all the time. And so what happens then is a government reaction is to, well, the scientists said, almost as though it's a new faith for us. But I've simplified it here into two simple diagrams. Science is more complex than this, but let's keep it simple. Firstly, there is what we call, on the left-hand side there, the experimental science. Now that is science that does establish facts. That is when we do chemistry, physics, and we do experiments. When you are there and you are following, say, a recipe that I'm giving you. I will give you a chemical experiment. I will give you the equipment. I will give you the chemicals themselves. I will say, follow my steps. I have an answer. Will you get the same answer? The answer is yes, you will get the same answer. If you didn't, then you've done something wrong. The point is it's the same answer. And so that is what we see science as. We think it is factual. More importantly, we think it is duplicatable, replicatable. We can all do the experiment and get the same answer. But the reality is that when we're dealing with things like biology, geology, astrophysics, hydrology, geomorphology, we are not dealing with experiments that we can undertake. I managed to monitor the 1974 flood in Brisbane, but I couldn't get to all the locations. I couldn't take all the measurements I wanted. Could I then go to the local government and say, look, please open up the Wivenhoe Dam again, flood Brisbane again, this time I'll be ready. I'll have all my equipment ready. No, it can't be done. And so same with biology, it can't be done. We can do some experimentation, some growth experiments, things like that, but in fact, most of the work is interpretational. We have to interpret. Let me explain that in a little more detail, just to make sure, and I'm going to put you to the test as well. This will be a little bit interesting little test for you. Because that's the historical side I'm talking about now, where we have scattered pieces of information. We were not there when that was created, whether it be a fossil or a rock. We were not there. We only have scattered pieces of information. How do we connect them? We have to interpret. We have to come up with an idea. It's not factual, it's an interpretation. Let me drive that message home. It's so powerful for us to understand this when scientists speak to us. I'm going to send you to South Africa. I'm going to give you $500,000 as a research assistant to me. I'm going to ask you to find some dinosaur bones. And you're going to come back and you're going to say to me, I found 2 dinosaur bones, Ron. I found 1 dinosaur bone here, certain shape, size, dimension, colour, all of these factors. And I found another dinosaur bone a few metres away of very similar size, shape, character and dimensions and so on. They're both dinosaur bones. And you come back to me after you've spent $500,000 going over there and doing all this work. I want you to raise your hand if you're going to come to me and tell me that those 2 bones come from the same dinosaur species. Raise your hand if you're going to do that. 1 down there, 2, congratulations, love your answer. I'm going to give you another $500,000. You're going to do some more research for me. In fact, we're going to take that answer, we're going to write a paper together. That'll get you a promotion, it'll get me more money. It's going to be a great outcome. Yes. Raise your hand if you'd come back to me and tell me they are not the same dinosaur species. Raise your hand. Couple of you. Congratulations. Love your answer. Again, I'm going to send you back to South Africa and do some work. We're going to publish a paper together on that it's not the same, and I'll try to get a promotion for you. Okay? Here's the question you did not want me to ask. I'm going to ask you to be honest. Raise your hand if you have not yet raised your hand. All of you, look at that. Amazing, amazing. In other words, I gave you $500,000 to go to South Africa to do some research for me, and you come back and you do the, I don't know. I'm sorry, you have just lost your position. You are terminated from university. You're out of the scene now. We do not have time for this sort of uncertainty. Why? Which one of those 2 answers that I said I'm happy with is correct? Which one is correct? You don't know. You don't know. It is an interpretation. It is not a factual outcome. We do not know with fact that they belong together. It is an interpretation. And that's the problem we face as scientists as we travel. And it's a problem you should understand, that when people speak to you in scientific terms, you ask the question simply, were they there when that was created? Were they there and able to replicate it and duplicate it in an experiment? If not, then understand this. It's an interpretation only. It's not a fact. And there's the problem that most of biology, geology, geomorphology, astrophysics sits on, because I can't recreate the Big Bang. I can't recreate the 74 flood in Brisbane. I can't do it. So we have to make interpretations. So this challenged me as I travelled the world. opened up my eyes to looking at all the evidence I was pointing at. And I'm just going to flick through a whole lot of slides now just to show you some of the beautiful landscapes I went to, had a good look at, and some of the points here. So I'm not going to be scientific, but I am going to focus on the dirt, the sediment, if you like, both from a landscape point of view and from a fossil point of view. As I travelled the world, what really hit me was that 70% of the planet is sedimentary rock. We don't find that on other planets. It's not only sedimentary rock made of sediment or dirt that's been washed down by a flood, it can be 12, 14, 20 kilometres deep. That's a massive amount of sediment. Not only that, 40% of the planet is flat. Plateau. Lovely plateaus. Africa's 60% plateau. How can it be a plateau with 300 to 500 million years of erosion? It just doesn't make sense. So I began to see these plateaus across China, Africa, and everywhere else. And they also had deep gorges in them, as you can see them there. Lovely deep gorges, whether they be the Grand Canyon, Katoomba. They're all over the place. Not only that, when you come up close to these cuttings that you see on these sedimentary plateaus, when you look at them there, you see these wonderful lineations, these stratigraphies they call them, the lines running across. And there you are there, I've put on a highlight there. There are these lines. Now, they don't just run short distances like that. They could run 1,000 kilometres like that. You go, wow, that's an incredible amount of deposition, amount of sediment, amount of dirt that's been put down over vast areas, 10,000 square kilometres. Fantastic. This is amazing. It can sometimes bend, of course, it can sometimes fold, but for the majority of it, it's rather flat. That was a challenge. I came across landscapes that are falling apart. They're eroding. They're landslips and slides and slumps. But guess what? Underneath it still, what do you see? Beautiful, beautiful lines. In other words, the landscape today is up and down like a yo-yo, but the depositional landscape is lovely and flat. That's fine. But we have a challenge. Don't try to understand this diagram. Let me do the speaking for you. Focus on the top. See that line there? That's the landscape today. Some high spots, some low spots down there. And underneath we see these flat lines. Forget about the reading. All these flat lines of the sedimentary strata. Okay? Here's the problem. If we listen to what science says, that these sediments, these dirts, were laid down over previous landscapes, there's the key, were they laid down over other landscapes that were there before because they should have been, if I dig down deep, I should find that. Previous landscapes. But we don't. So this slow process of building up sediment and dirt, and it's covering other landscapes, we don't find it. In other words, a previous landscape has been completely destroyed. And what we find is massive layers of sediment around the planet. No past landscapes. Isn't that fascinating? You might find a little bit on a delta being created today, but we do not see it in the large features all around the world. So, the final feature about these plateaus, I'm trying to get a picture in your head. We have plateaus occupying 40% of the world and 70% being sedimentary, dissected by these incredible canyons. But internally, they're all lovely and homogeneous. They're all lovely. But on top of them too, in this plateau here in northwest Wyoming, that rock doesn't belong there. That rock looks like a rock in a river channel, a major river channel. It's like bedload, they call it. So you can see it's nice and round. It's got concussion marks on it. And it's a geology that doesn't belong there. And you go, oh, someone's left that there. Well, they've done a lot of work then, because on that plateau alone, there are 1 billion of those rocks that came from 500 kilometres away. For a river to do that is today impossible, because the velocity needed is higher than any velocity we could ever imagine on the earth today. The depth that is needed is incredible. So there's 1 billion there. But if you go to other plateaus like in South Africa, you'll find again another 1 billion rocks that don't belong there, that have been rounded from concussion, being washed along. So I was left in this incredible picture of a world of plateaus, beautiful uniform things, layers that did not overlie an existing landscape, that's gone. Gorges, because I had imagined if there was water on there, it doesn't flow off evenly, it never does. It flows off and concentrates into gorges and leaves behind a residue of that. So I was left with an unusual interpretation as I travel the world, that the landscapes reflect a global flood. When I expressed this, I was ridiculed, laughed at, and this was a number of years ago, a couple of decades ago now. But surprisingly, last year, the first paper ever published in a journal said, guess what? We think we found evidence that the earth was once flooded. But it didn't happen 4,500 years ago, it happened 1 million years ago at least. So in other words, I'm no longer alone saying there was a global flood. Change the topic just to spend a few moments on the fossils themselves, because the fossils, by the way, what's the connection? They are all buried in flood dirt, flood sediment. Every sediment has a unique fingerprint. If I go to the beach and take a sample, or I go to a sand dune and take a sample, or I go to a floodplain and take a sample, the sediment has a different, distinct feature. It's a fingerprint. I won't go into the details, but it's got to do with schooner, scotosis, median, all the rest. The point is, fossils are wrapped up in flood sediments. Flood sediments. Of the trillions of fossils, 99.9999% are wrapped up in flood sediments. Not meteor sediments, as is claimed at times, not landslides, not volcanic, they're wrapped up in flood sediments. And there's a very important reason for that. And so people today, we look at these flood sediments and we see here's some water washing sediment into Takatuma Lagoon in the Cook Islands. And I could work in the Cook Islands, by the way, because after all of these decades of doing this research around the world, putting my life at risk, being arrested by foreign governments, being shot at, being medevaced out, having hepatitis, having every other disease. I had COVID long before you even heard of the word in China. I was knocked out for 3 months. And all of these sorts of things when I was working in Wuhan. So, yeah, well, don't get excited about COVID. It's been around for a long time. And so here we look at that and people go, oh, that's terrible. Look at that sediment. It's going to destroy the coral reef of, the coral islands in Takatuma Lagoon. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't, because that's an image. You look at that and what do? You interpret. You say, that's bad. But have you measured it? Have you seen where it goes? No. And so we have an automatic response that that's bad. But it's not. It's not like that at all. In fact, the study that came out of that sediment was not affecting the coral reef at all. It was way too small in amounts in its concentration and so on. But again, I'll come back to that. Why was I on the Cook Islands? Because all of my study around the world let me rise to the rank of professor in multiple continents. So I could work where I wanted to work. As an academic, and I thought, I'll work in the Cook Islands. How's that? That's pretty cool. I'll go there. And when I came back to Australia, I set up the Fraser Island Research Centre. Why? Because I could. And I wanted to be there and travel over Fraser Island, hoon around in a four-wheel drive, all that sort of stuff, And but I loved being out in the field, and I was growing, I was maturing, and I was trying to define myself. But of course, in the end, I wasn't able to complete that without our Lord. I was able to do it from a social point of view, an academic point of view, but not from a fullness of heart point of view. Anyhow, fossils are buried in sediment. So where does the sediment come from? That's the first question I asked. Where does the sediment come from? Well, the sedimentation rates in the oceans, where you'd expect a lot of sediment, wow, we've been monitoring it now for decades. We estimate it could get up to 50 millimetres in 1,000 years. Does that get you excited? Do you think 50 millimetres over 1,000 years could fossilise a cockroach? No, it cannot. Here's the point. It's the majority of fossils we find today are marine. Yet nowhere on the planet is there enough sediment or dirt, flood sediment, to create a fossil. In fact, they don't like telling you this, but they have searched the planet for fossils being created today. And guess how many we found? None. In other words, there's no environment on the planet today that can create a fossil. I'll come back to that. So in the oceans, no, nothing there. When we dig up floodplains and we look down there and we can put some dates on that. How do we know it's 1789 or 1900? You'll laugh at this. One of the techniques I used was Coca-Cola bottles. They change over time. You find them buried in that sequence. Okay, that was the date they made those Coke. Or you'd find cigarette butts, because the original cigarette butts did not decompose the way the new ones do. So you'd look for those that were up to here. Okay, that's when the cigarettes were changed. I have a date for that layer. Isn't that fascinating? Using simple indicators like that. But studies around the world have shown that the sedimentation rates on floodplains, the amount of sediment being deposited, even in catastrophic events, is nothing. Fiji was excited about 3.2 centimetres in a year. Whoa. You know, that was a major event. The highest rate recorded over a small area, really, was 10 centimetres, and that was in New South Wales. And I was the one who discovered that, and I published a paper on it, and it helped me rise the ranks because I published a paper on it, 10 centimetres, and the world got excited. 10 centimetres of sediment. Would that fossilise a cockroach? No, it would not. And because it's in New South Wales, I have loved now being in ministry, travelling across Australia, travelling around the world, and declaring New South Wales is the dirtiest state on the planet. My friends started to say to me, Ron, what about tsunamis? Well, guess what? Tsunamis don't create a lot of flood sediments either. Up to 10 centimetres again has been recorded in the greatest disaster we saw from a tsunami, which was in Indonesia a few years back. You can actually still see there are people there, standing there. Those are people. And that brown is actually grass, still standing up. It's got a slight staining of sediment on that'll be washed off in the next rainfall. In other words, the houses get knocked down, the buildings get knocked down, but the grass and the trees are not covered in sediment. So even the world's largest catastrophe we've seen from a tsunami does not create an environment for fossils. So whatever created fossils then had to be spectacularly large. So to make sure they understood fossils, a number of researchers really want to try and understand this. So the University of Queensland took some crocodiles, buried them under 20 centimetres of flood sediment, and guess what happened? They bloated and floated. You could not even hold a little baby infant crocodile under 20 centimetres. That's published in the Creation magazine. It's written for you, not for scientists. I wrote that up for you. And the only thing Creation Ministry would not let me do was use my humour, which is I wanted a cartoon drawn of the researcher standing on the crocodile trying to hold it down. They wouldn't let me do it. So that's Creation Ministries. So that didn't work. But we did find out how to make fossils in a day. And here's the link now to the sediment. For 20 years, scientists have been taking lizard legs or leaves and then pressing it between two pieces of concrete, trying to put a lot of pressure on it. And then 24 hours later, opening it up, and what do they find? Mush. Just mush. Nothing. So what they decided to do, in the end, they said, well, what do these geomorphologists talk about? They talk about the flood sediment surrounds. See, everybody was focusing on the fossil. I wasn't interested in the fossil. I was interested in the dirt that surrounds the fossil. So what they did was they took flood sediment, wrapped it around the lizard part, then squeezed it at an incredible pressure for 24 hours, opened it up, and guess what? They had created a fossil. Here's the question for you. What are you made up of mostly? Water, liquid. So if the liquid stays there, fossils can't be formed. In other words, we've now discovered the liquid has to be removed from your body fairly fast. And what happened was, guess what absorbed the liquid? The flood sediment has an incredible ability to absorb liquid. So the flood sediment absorbs the liquid, allowing it then to be fossilised, which means then it has to be an awful lot of sediment, not centimetres, it has to be tens of metres, hundreds of metres, to create the pressure that's going to force the water out of you. That's what it's going to take. And so that was a wonderful scientific discovery. Again, I've written it up as an article for you to read in the Creation magazine, and so on. And the final piece of research that shocked the world was when one scientist cut open a dinosaur bone, which was considered absolutely wrong, and found that internally within that bone were blood tissues that could be stretched and put back into position, and red blood cells and so on. They thought this was a mistake, so they cut up other bones, and they found the same story time and time again. Medical doctors around the world have gathered and said those blood vessels, and that's expandable and tissue that you can replace, could not have survived more than 10,000 years. But the literature still tells us today that dinosaurs died 65 million years ago. So the scientific world is now in chaos over this one. So I came now to a conclusion that sediment supply rates not only did they create the landscapes, but they were needed to create fossils. But the amount we see today is not good enough to create these landscapes. It's not good enough to create fossils. We know that because it's been measured all around the world. And fossils were not formed millions of years ago. So I became quite confused now with all of this type of study. And that really did drive home to me that a global flood did occur. Now, I'm not going to go into the science of that anymore. We have so much for you to look at online in our creation.com website. There's a search engine up there. We have 14,000 articles written for you. You can copy them, use them as you like. We're not going to sue you for plagiarism. We want you to copy them and use them. They are written for you. Was it hard for me to write for you? Very hard. I was used to writing for academia. I could write whatever I like and it would be published. The first article I submitted to CMI, Creation Ministries International, had to be re-edited 4 times. Ron, you don't understand the public. They can't listen to your language. Ron, you better check that scripture, mate. You better make sure it's in the right context here, etc., etc. I have never had to write an article 4 times, and I did it, but that's the standard Creation Ministry set, particularly in their magazine. That's why their magazines are so excellent. And I love working with these incredible people. The site is called creation.com. It's that simple. Creation.com. You've only got to remember that one thing today because you'll get an answer to anything you want essentially by going to creation.com. If you don't find the answer, use the Q&A and speak to us. We will, within 2 weeks, we guarantee to get an answer back to you from some expert around the world. That's our job. Why? Because we want to equip you. We want to feed you, that you grow stronger in the Lord, that you accept the Bible as history, as the foundation. The book of Genesis is the foundation for Christ. So, we also have Get Connected. They're outside there. They don't look like that, unfortunately. There's little sign-up things. Every 2 weeks we send out an email, the latest stuff. Again, it's written for you. It might be the latest movie that's out on dinosaurs. It might be some protesting going on against Christians, all that sort of thing. So you can sign up for that. And if you don't like it, you can just, I'm just going to finish that off. If you don't like it, just disconnect, okay? Just disconnect. It doesn't worry me. I'm not going to come searching for you. It's sort of, I'm not going to offer you steak knives. I'm not doing anything. You're gone, okay? So it's good to try it because it helps us to communicate with others. And so, God said, and behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth. I knew that from all my attending at churches all around the world, but I was teaching that science says no such flood had occurred. It was a regional flood in the Black Sea. So I was traumatised at this point, really confused as a scientist. I now said that, look at this, go back to the original diagram. I now said the evidence points to the Bible, not to the concept of evolution. So I was very, very much challenged by all of this. And I began to say openly in a university, I think God exists. Do you think universities like hearing that? No, they don't. So I became ridiculed, I became mocked, and one particular person, a lady who was a biologist, decided she would challenge me. She had never seen a tutor who believed in God. She actually thought I was a Christian. She'd not seen any lecturer do it, but here's a professor who runs a research institute on Fraser Island, has all the benefits in the world, believes there is a God. So she challenged me, and I gave her the academic answer to every question. Go read the book. What does that mean? In academia, you are taught that if you don't know the answer, don't say you don't know the answer because you're an academic. You say, no, go and read the book. And I was referring to the Bible, of course. So what did she do as an atheist? She went and read the book. And she started at the beginning, the book of Genesis. And she came back with more difficult questions. Why did God kill so many people? And I thought, what are you reading? She said, the book of Genesis and Exodus. I said, no. I've been to church enough. I think you've got to read them thing called the Gospels. And she walked away going, you Christians are weird. You read from the back, forward, you know. Anyhow, she challenged me time and time again. We became quite, and I didn't want to, if she walked this way, I'd walk that way. She was an atheist. I'd now become an agnostic, essentially. And then one day she said, look, I want you to take me to church because I want to prove to you that God doesn't exist. And I thought, oh, what do I do about that? I put it off week after week and she just got angrier. So it was quite difficult. In the end, I said, fine, I'll come around, I'll pick you up and we'll go to a church. We went to a church. On that day, she got angry. She said, this is not a church. Why? I said, well, where's the stained glass windows? What's the band doing up on stage? Where's the organ? I said, I don't know, just sit down. So we did. At the end of that, there was a call for people to come to Christ, give their lives to Christ. Lower your heads, close your eyes, all the rest of it. And guess what? She put her hand up. She gave her life to Christ. Does she remember what the sermon was? No. Do I? No. We were too busy to each other. She gave her life to Christ, and then she cheated, opened up her eye to see how I'd feel about that I'd become a Christian. And guess what she saw? My hand was up as well. I'd given my hand. So here we are. An atheist brought an agnostic into a church without any Christians helping, and both of them gave their lives to Christ that day. And guess what? Immediately, all our science fell into place. All her biology and all of my earth science fell into place, and suddenly it hit us. The Bible is absolutely correct. Did I dislike her anymore? No. A year and a half later, I married her. She sends her love. She does ministry with women's groups now, particularly looking at identity issues and so on. So that's how I became a Christian. It was, first of all, the science pointed me towards the Bible, and then secondly, I had to be challenged. In my case, I'm a difficult case, so I'm going to have a good chat to Paul when I get there. He was a difficult case. I was a difficult case. It took many decades and a lot of beating around the head, but I finally gave my life to Christ. To wrap it up then, ladies and gentlemen, you know what to do. Creation Ministries, we're here to equip and empower you. We want you to remain strong. We want you to accept the whole Bible as one story, not two stories. We want you to accept. There's no myth. It's absolutely the truth. Jesus Christ embedded his entire teaching on the Old Testament, particularly the book of Genesis. He referred to many times. Have a look at that. Whether it be Sodom and comparing it to Capernaum, or whether it's, for example, Noah's Ark and his return. He used the book of Genesis. In other words, he accepted the book of Genesis as factual, and he accepted it as the foundation of his teaching. If I challenge the book of Genesis, I'm not challenging the book. I'm not challenging Moses, who may have written it. I'm challenging Christ himself. And that's not acceptable to me. So how do you stay strong? Of course, you know that. Pastor Gary will remind you all the time. You do Bible study all the time. That's wonderful. Constant prayer, discussion with friends and all that sort of. Here's your homework. I want you to write this down if you've got a pen and paper. Colossians 2:8. Colossians 2:8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ. Because that's what's happening today. Talk more about that in the next talk. But we are being taken captive by hollow and deceptive arguments that are emerging from scientists and from the media and from the educational systems. Those viewpoints, though, depend on human tradition, human thinking, not biblical thinking. And another piece of scripture to look at is 2 Corinthians 10:5. Cast down the arguments that every high thing that brings itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity in the obedience of Christ. What would I like you to do with those? I'd like you to meet up with a friend at some stage, read it, study it, pray over it, and ask yourself the following questions. Do I put the Bible above science, or do I put science above the Bible? What if I try something else? What if I try and merge the science and Bible together to make a sort of interesting tapestry of story? Is that what we're doing? What about if you're a parent or a grandparent and your child's going to school and they're constantly exposed to evolution and the argument there? How do you handle that? It's something for you to discuss with each other. So I put those two scriptures in there as a bit of homework because I'm an academic. I have to give you homework to go and do that. I'll expect to see your assignments by tomorrow, 9 a.m. No, I won't do that to you. And so, to wrap it up then, support materials, what we have out there. Have a good look at them. We have a code, there it is, RN230318. You can write that down. It's also listed out there. It's simply the date today with my initials, RN, and then a date written in reverse. What does that mean? It means you'll get a discount if you order them online tomorrow, Monday. Oh no, you've got 24 hours. So tomorrow. The answers book is fantastic. 60 plus questions on how to answer non-Christians who challenge you. For example, somebody says, oh, you're a Christian, are you? Yeah. Oh, then who did Cain marry? A lot of people go, oh. Well, you know what the answer is? If you don't know what it is, you say, look, catch up with you tomorrow. I'm busy now. You race home, you grab that red book, you read that chapter, and you meet them tomorrow. They are 60 questions that get commonly asked of you. There is another little book, beautiful little blue book there. It's about people going to university today. It's only $4, that book, about what's going to happen to you when you go to university as a young person. Great book. And finally, to close it up, the magazine. That's our number one production. It is outstanding. Every issue contains all elements of stories, whether they be space, evolution, geomorphology, but it'll be written for you, not for me. There are articles that you can understand. So when Julie and I gave our lives to Christ, she came from an atheistic family, I came from a troubled family, we actually started sharing that magazine with them. Today, close to 50% of that family, particularly mine, disrupted, so much alcoholism in the extended family, they've given it up and they've given their lives to Christ simply by reading that sort of material. So you don't have to be out there being, strong. You simply have to surround yourself with the equipment that links and feeds to others as well. To close that down, at a download program in Brisbane, in Adelaide, download program was in Canberra on this occasion, I think. A lot of the students that were there, young adults, many going to university, were asked, do you believe in 6 days? Do you believe in the flood? Over 50% of them said yes. To which even Martin Iles was like, wow, that's not what we see in education. And I said, where do you get that information from? And they said, we have the Creation magazine. And then they were asked, so did you get a copy of it? Was it subscribed to you? They said, no, Mum and Dad had it. We read it. And they became wonderful, strong believers in the full Bible, using that magazine with all the other materials you've got and the sermons you get and so on, the ministry you have. And so there we are. If a boy had not been raised on a magazine, I want to put cartoons in my stuff, but they won't let me, but I can do it here where CMI doesn't see me doing this. Dad says, see the rainbow? It reminds us that God will never again destroy the earth with a flood. And the young boy says, really? My professor says that Noah's flood was confined to the Middle East. Had he been raised on the Creation magazine and been able just to see it lying around the house, his answer may well have been yes. But how come my professor can't see that a global flood did once occur? Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you, we make no money on that, by the way. We make no money. Our money comes from donations, not from our equipment. That's to link and feed. The purpose of that is to put it in your hands for one other purpose. We don't want to just put it in your hands so you can read it. We want to put it in your hands so you can share it. Where's the best place to leave it? Anywhere. I tell you a good one though, a doctor's surgery. How many people go into a doctor's surgery scared? They're willing to read it. Trust me, I've done that. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. I'll leave it up to you to have a good look at all that material, and I look forward to seeing you at the second talk as well. We will look at some of the challenges that now face us. But I hope you got a message there that's very clear. Science today points to the Bible. Many scientists are giving their lives to Christ. Those who are not have said to me personally, I accept your argument. The evidence points to the Bible. I just don't want to become a Christian. Isn't that sad? Because it's been driven into them. Thank you.